expanded it to cover a whole range of different types of advisors. And what we're trying to do here is to bring together so there's a degree of consistency in terms of the advice that people are giving, and also that people can learn from each other. So this week or this last week, for example, we've run 4 workshops on safety critical assets, and we've basically been updating the original information that we compiled back many years ago. But I think most people are aware of that. So I won't go. I mean, Cyprian and people were I think were actually actively involved in that. Certainly you were, Matt. I think Bex was as well. So what we've done with that is that we're updating the guidance. We've also generated a very interesting little podcast from it as well. That's done from the information that's come together. So that's going to be we're going to be putting that on the BIM4Housing website. But as far as the guidance is concerned, the other thing that we've got is obviously the Miro board that Daz and also Jarek are managing. So if there's information that you've got about the interpretation of the legislation, then that's a good place to go and suggest improvements. And finally, we had the BIM4Housing Development Group meeting on Friday, or was it Thursday, which was well attended. And we had another one yesterday, which was the design group meeting, which again was very active. It was very, very useful. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we can come up with today. Matt, Gareth, I think you've been thinking about what we're going to cover. Do you want to just introduce yourselves, and obviously Debbie as well, who's one of the leads on this consulting group? Could you just introduce yourselves as to what you do and where you'd like to go with this? First of all, Matt, could you do that?
Yes. Apologies, George. I've got to jump off in 2 minutes very quickly, and I'll be straight back. But no, I'm Matt Taylor, Director of Taylor Design Consultancy. We are an independent dry lining and internal fit out consultant. We deal with it tends to be larger scale projects that tend to warrant having a trade specific package consultant involved. We deal with contracts right from architectural clients through to main contractors, trade contractors, and building clients to ensure that, with primary aim of reducing the potential for defects to be built on site.
Excellent. Okay. Debbie, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, Debbie Carlton. I have a niche consultancy called Dynamic Knowledge that specializes in competency management and knowledge management. I do a lot of work in the built environment, and I do a lot of work with AI. I sit on the Bridge Advisory AI group and involved in supporting a number of businesses doing AI platforms and stuff in the sector. And there's a lot going on that all organizations can tap into at the moment in terms of AI resources if they want to be more aware of them. I also feed into the Industry Competence Committee. I mean, they keep on publishing new guidance, new expectations, etc., and feedback on that. I don't sit formally on the panel, but they do ask me to review it before they publish stuff. So that's just a short synopsis of my experience.
Thank you very much. And Gareth?
Good morning, all. I'm Gareth Grimes. I'm the Technical Director at Clough Banks. We are a 3-pronged consultancy. We offer building control, and also first principles fire design and facade and site services, including clocks of the works. And our third silo is building safety advisory, so bridging the gap between building control and the built environment. And over 20 years in industry, chartered with countless agencies. My aim is to try and simplify what everybody is doing within the industry and remove all the complications that are currently man-made and woman-made, to be politically correct. But lots of overcomplication out there. So my aim is to try and simplify things for everybody.
Excellent. Okay. I think probably it would be good to get other people to just, because I know everybody here, I think. Not sure I know Junaid, but everybody else I've spoken to. So what would I think be good is for you just quickly to introduce each other. So Junaid, can I ask you to explain what you are and what you do? Have I pronounced your name properly? Okay, let's move on. Cyprian.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My background or what I'm doing at the moment, I'm a building and design compliance consultant. I actually carry out or perform the building regulation principal designer role and get involved as well with advising, other principal designers or project teams on the building regulation when it comes on to submittal, both for non-HRBs and HRB.
Excellent. Thank you, Cyprian. Yeah. Bex, can I come to you?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Bex. I work at Ryder Levitt Bucknell. I'm a building safety consultant specializing in the post-occupancy side of things. So everything post-Building Safety Act, really.
Cool. Thank you.
Oh,
David Simpson.
sorry, George. I work for Franklin Risk Management. Should put that in.
Yeah, sure. Okay, Frankens. Yeah, thank you. David Simpson.
Hello, I'm David Simpson from Associated Architects. We work across multi-sectors, including housing, a lot of higher education, schools in particular, and commercial. We also have recently set up a BRPD arm, both for our own projects and for other projects as well. And we've got 2 architects who are registered with the RIBA to undertake that. And I'm really here in my role as the practice BIM manager to understand how we can better deliver the data that's needed throughout the life of the project in a streamlined way.
And you've been to several of the BIM and asset management meetings, David. What are you looking for from this community, would you say?
It's really consensus and consistency in what we deliver, and also how we demonstrate and review competency, in particular for the BRPD role. So we've recently aligning all of our competency review standards with the RIBA documentation. So just understand, is that something that everyone else is doing, or are there other sets of standards that people use?
Well, it's a very interesting point, and it was raised last week by somebody that's a profound expert in the building regs process. And what he's explained is that what RIBA have done leaves out some very key sections of the Building Safety Act. In particular, they seem to have excluded the fire safety information. So, on the spreadsheet, you've got all the different tabs the ones that relate to Regulation 38, and I think it's Regulation 7, it might be as well. I'm not quite sure which ones, but he was saying that they've not been included. Now, I was talking with another architect yesterday in the design group meeting. We were discussing this in the design group meeting, not in any detail, but he's also going through the process of, he's using the that framework, that REBA template, which obviously I think a lot of people are going to use. But he said he wasn't aware of that. And the guy last week was explaining that where the PDBR is working on behalf of a design and build contractor, if they simply follow that REBA guidance, the contractor is going to be exposed.
Mm.
So I think that's something worth us maybe having a separate session on.
That's useful. I mean, that tracker itself is something that we've developed our own version of. So that's the only one of those RIBA framework documents that we don't use.
Okay.
But we do use the competency assessment.
Yeah.
Various spreadsheets.
Cyprian,
so
just before
that's probably why.
Yeah, Cyprian, just before I put you on, I've noticed that I've not opened up to Nick, who's one of my old friends. So Nick, could you just explain what you do?
Yeah, I've been active in BIM for almost as long as George, or perhaps the same length of time even. The last 25 years, I've been an independent consultant. And one of the things I specialized is automated regulatory compliance. And maybe also supported compliance systems. Yeah, I think the whole Building Safety Act thing has actually thrown up some really novel problems, like being asked to schedule every regulation and what building elements comply with it, which has never been seen before in any regulatory system I've seen. So I think there are a lot of challenges that we actually have to think differently. We've got a passive aggressive regulator who just folds their arms and says impress us, and then throws out these really very demanding requirements.
That actually those requirements are actually potentially killing projects.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they're killing projects because people don't understand them and they don't have the means to prepare the answers.
Yeah.
Where my interest in automation comes in. I think a lot of the working groups that I've dipped in and out of, so I may be wrong, are heavily focused on gathering information and evidence, but there's been very little attention to proving safety or proving compliance.
As far as our groups are concerned,
yeah,
I do think we are including that as well. But I think I definitely think that sort of relationship is critical, and if we can improve it, then we should do. Cyprian, got your hand up.
I actually created, just going back to the REBA template. I actually created a document for myself, but it's only relevant to the HRB. Now, the thing what we have to do, reason why the regulation 38 is not in this document, it's been forgotten, but even so, I'm working on a project at the moment, and I'm looking at going through the Part 2 Regulation 7 and 8 and the Regulation 4, Part 2 Regulation 4, and some of these where I'm working between stage 1 to 3. I'm at stage 3 now. Stage 4 I haven't started. Regulation 38 is not relevant between stage 1. You don't need that until you reach the end of stage 4, or if you, not stage 4, stage 5, or between stage 5 stage 6. So this document from REBA is actually a design. It's a design management document, and I've had this conversation with other architects, and I personally feel that when a lot of these, as I said, like part 2 regulation 4 and part 2 7 and 8 is not really relevant at this stage at the moment, because obviously you have the different parts of the schedule 1, the different tabs and what have you, and then that's at the end of the project. That's when we reach stage 5, that's when you start to populate, and that's a contractor as well, a PC. That's the PC's remit to put the regulation 38 documents together. So just saying that this is actually a design management to manage the design during the design stage between REBA stage 1 to 4. That's, I don't know if any of the architects on here have any views on that, and the relevance of regulation 38 is not really necessary at this stage. I don't know if anybody else have a view on that.
That surprises me a little bit, because I would have thought that the design strategy is something that should be reflected in the handover information. Does anybody else have a view as to that?
Well, technically it is, because this is where, like, this is where, when you look at this is where you're going to get your start putting or getting your all of the information that you need, or have you. Take for example the design and access statement is one of the main things that's evidence at this stage of the project with the planning document. So in essence, it is being developed. This is where the you call it the golden thread is being developed. So it's there. The tabs are there. For example, zoning in on the regulation 38. The tabs are there to create it. But I don't think at this year, because as I said, this document automatically becomes part, all the evidence put together becomes part of the golden thread. From the golden thread, you will be taking out the document. So the PC will take out the documents. This is my view. That's required for the regulation 38. So what I'm simply saying is that the regulation 38 tab at this stage is just not really necessary. Or what at stage 1, 2, and 3, what are you going to be commenting on regulation 38? Apart from that, just that the contractor should ensure that the information is submitted to the AP or the responsible person at the end of the project.
Okay, I mean, I have to say, I thought that the role of the well, I'm pretty sure that the role of the building regs PD extends beyond design.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. But it's there's restrictions. Like, for example, it's still, when you say, sorry, George, when you say extend beyond role of design, what do you what's the interpretation of that?
Yeah, I think probably let's open it up to the floor a little bit, because there's probably other people. I don't want this to be just you and me, Cyprian.
No problem.
David, would you have a view on that?
Certainly, our view is that it certainly extends beyond the early RRBA stages, right through to completion, and beyond. We often have quite a debate with the BR principal contractor as to where the overlap is between our responsibility and their responsibility, and where the handover is. and you know, we see the design continuing, even, you know, particularly on design and build project, all the way through the stages, and we see our role in making sure that designs that were submitted by the supply chain are still in compliance with the early stage design intent, and regulation 38 in particular we see is quite key in that, in tracking any changes that come through that process and making sure that they have been agreed by everybody who's responsible for that. And we very often get, even when we're not BRP'd, even when we're just the architects on that, we will get trackers and forms from the contractor to, you know, to sign against effectively for each stage 5 or construction design change, that we still believe this is in accordance with the original various strategies for the design.
Absolutely. Does anybody, rather than us sort of dominating it on that particular point, is there anybody else that has some comments?
Yeah, I would concur with what David is saying, and some clients that I'm working with and advising on the competency aspects of the Building Safety Act. Also, the bit that gets sort of bit misunderstood is that until you understand where the responsibilities lie, you can't really be sure about getting what your competence requirements are right. Yes, so there is a relationship between responsibilities and duties and competence. Yes, which unfortunately has been a bit misunderstood by the Industry Competence Committee. Yes, so you know, it's better to be sure you're getting the duties and responsibilities right, and then aligning what your competence requirements are against that. Yes, as an intent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, George. I was just going to say I'd agree with that entirely. What is resulting from that, and what we're sort of seeing is, again, as was happening around a decade ago, and as sort of we've seen some sort of push in the other direction, but it now seems to be going back, is just sort of selling downstream of design responsibility. So what seems to be happening now is that we're tendering on 3 projects at the moment where the architect is stating that they don't have or they consider themselves not to have responsibility for any of the fire performance whatsoever. So they are, in effect, in their own view, only commenting on the aesthetic performance or aesthetic arrangements within the building, and setting out bits and pieces like this, which I would argue isn't fulfilling their role as an architect. I mean, if we've got package specific consultants, there still needs to be somebody in there coordinating that process. And I'll give you an example. If we're looking at party walls in a multi-story building, and we have to take some sort of we have to sort of accept an arrangement that the architect has done their process correctly or carried out their process correctly, and therefore if walls are stated as being a 60-minute requirement, that's what is required. One of the reasons for that is that some of that fire strategy falls outside of our scope. So for example, if I was to state that typically that wall would be 120 minutes, if there are different if there's a different fire strategy in there relating to, say, for example, the M&E, the sprinkler system, that might be a 60-minute requirement. Now, for the architect to say, I'm not taking responsibility for that, we're going to end up with mistakes. We're going to end up with somebody saying, well, ultimately, I think that should be a 60-minute wall when it's in fact an 120-minute wall, because they're not aware of all of the contributing factors. So it's quite a dangerous position to be in. And it also raises the question, if, and I'm speaking specifically about a couple of projects here, but we're seeing this, I've seen this sort of 4 or 5 times in the last couple of years now. If we're having architects saying, actually, we don't feel that we are capable of providing information to do with fire performance, why does that raise a competency question? As far as I'm concerned, the architect should be competent to do that. So are we saying that the architect isn't a competent party in providing information on Part B on fire performance within the building? Because that's quite a sort of concerning suggestion, in my opinion.
Thank you, Matt. Gareth.
Thanks, George. Matt, I just really want to ask you a question. What's the fire engineer saying on the projects?
Not a lot at the moment.
So, in principle, the architect will lay out, obviously, the floor plate. This is where the rooms are. This is the space we've got to work with. The architect will interpret part B. So what's required in regards to travel distances laid on that. The underpinning design comes then from the fire engineer to say, yes, it complies with part B, or actually we need to work outside of part B and use BS 9991 or 9999. That then prompts the architect to change the floor plate, add cross corridor doors, whatever the case may be. But ultimately, the fire engineer's got to be the one who's challenging the architect's layouts in regards to travel distances. The compartmentation is set out in ADB. So if the architect is saying, well, I'm taking no responsibility of this, I would be challenging, well, do you understand part B or not? Because you can't just draw something and go, that's what we're going to build. It needs it in feed from everyone. And then there's duties under CDM that the architect's got to provide. So sounds very complex. Thankfully, I'm not on the scheme, but ultimately the challenge has got to be to the fire engineer who's on those two schemes and saying, well, what's your thoughts on this? You know, is it a 60-minute or is it 120? And then that's justified by ADB or 9991 or 9999. So that's my advice on that one.
I agree with that. I think that what seems to be happening is there's a huge amount of ignorance of the CDM regulations. A lot of certainly parties that we're dealing with regularly and organisations that are frankly large enough to know better are unaware of the requirements of the regulations. They're unaware of their duties as a designer. We've had sort of efforts to try and hide who the principal designer is on projects, which is concerning. The other thing with that, we've on these particular projects, we do have a fire engineer who's involved. There has been whoever the fire engineer who's been advising the architect is seemingly long gone. We've had another fire engineer who's been sort of put in place by the main contractor. They have provided a report which the main contractors disagreed with, and then they've been told they're no longer involved, which is again is slightly worrying. And so we're left with a situation where it's very much a scenario, and I'm seeing an increasing number of these where we're almost told this is the state the project is in. It's now down to the stage 5 contractors and associated consultants to pick up the pieces. And my understanding of the gateways and the Building Safety Act is that isn't supposed to be happening. We're supposed to be now getting projects that are pretty robust in terms of their design and capable of well, to get through those gateways, they're supposed to be of a certain standard. That's not what I'm seeing.
Yeah, it is. There's again, a lot of it is confusion. Goes back to my opening statement where I'm trying to simplify stuff. We've got a lot of ostriches out there burying their head in the sand, and rather than seek and talk through people who've been through a process. George, can I upload a document because I'm not? It won't let me upload. But what I've generated, and everybody can take it away, use it.
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. I don't see why you can't upload. Jess, are you on the call?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Is there a permissions thing that that Gareth needs to have?
No, I think we are open from our end. Maybe it's from Gareth's end. If we can't upload, Gareth, just send me the document so I can upload it from my end and everyone will be able to.
Do you want to show it?
Yeah. If you're happy, I'll happily share it. So
just before you do that, Gareth, just picking up on what Matt said there, I think that's really critical because what that comes down to, I think a couple of things really that spring to mind. One is scopes of service. Yeah. Is anybody responsible for aligning? Because I think it probably is the client making sure that the scopes of service are aligned. Because the point about the fire engineer is a good one, but my understanding is that a lot of fire engineers are being appointed on a relatively simple scope, and they only do a certain amount of work up until a period, and then the rest of it somebody needs to, for example, be picking what materials are being used. Yeah, and how does that, and what happens if the fire strategy changes? So who owns that? And I think it's all very unclear.
Well, under CDM, George, the principal designer is the one who's capturing these things. The golden thread should be capturing any change management. So this segues straight into the document I want to share with everyone, and let me just share my screen. So basically on the screen, team, is I'm working with a client who is unsure of their competencies, unsure of their duties, and unsure of who the design team needs to be. I'll share this. People can take it away, do what you want with, but basically it provides a structure of scoring everybody who's being appointed, and do they understand what their legal duties are under the Building Safety Act, under CDM, and it covers the whole team. I won't go through every item. You can take it away and have a look at it. There's a competency matrix that's in there. So what this proves, or at least demonstrates, that the team appointed have gone through gateways to prove that they are able to deliver their package, their design, etc., etc. So if something happens later down the line and the BSR or whomever challenges the client under the Building Safety Act or under CDM, they can say, we've done a robust check. And it ultimately ends with a face-to-face interview with all parties. And what is in the back of the document are CDM regulations and what the duties are of the client, designers, contractors, etc., etc. These are all the baseline legislation that anyone engaging on a project should be aware that they are doing. And then ultimately, when you come out of CDM using this document, it's then the Building Safety Act and the other duties required. It gives a robust confidence to clients and designers that they're meeting what legislation is asking. Loads of confusion. People are writing skebs and going, this is me, that's what we can do. But as a point Debbie raised, lots of people are confusing different asks. So I've put this together and we're working with a number of clients. I'll share it. People want to use it and make it your own, crack on. There is enough work out there. As I say, my aim on this, simplify everything. We're making things far too complicated. There's simple questions we should be asking: who, what, where, when, how, and why. They should be the base conversations we're having with anybody. So if you're happy, take it away and use at your will.
What I would really like to do, Debbie, you've got a comment to make.
You go first, George, and then I'll jump in.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so what I was just going to say, I think that's excellent, Gareth. What I think would be really useful is for us to look at other people, because I imagine that other organizations are doing something similar. What we really want to do is have an industry best practice or example of that. So if it were possible for other people, I mean, I see Richard Nestor's here you're from Mott MacDonald, I think, aren't you, Richard? Richard, are you there?
Just go for the mute button. Yes, I am from Mott's, yeah.
Yeah. So what Gareth's just shown there, I imagine that Mott's and Frankham's from Cyprian and other people, they would have a similar type of set of information. Now, if we could bring that together, I mean, given the fact it's driven presumably, Gareth, from your interpretation of the regulations.
Exactly that, and through experience of the old-fashioned selling yourself to the clients on this is the service deliverables. Lots of, certainly in my time in industry, lots of contracts were won at that end stage of interview. Tell me how you manage health and safety. So you look in people, the whites of their eyes. Everybody wants to just go, well, here's all my paperwork that says that I can do it. Show me the people front and center who are going to deliver. I want to talk to the architect, not to the draftsman. I want to talk to the fire engineer. These are the conversations that really need to happen. Who's the person who's applying first principles to the structure, etc., etc. That's where you get to the nuts and bolts. Unfortunately, everybody does the reverse breaststroke to say that they can deliver services, and they backfill resource with people who are brand new from different industries, and they're just being admin clerks and firing out stuff. Show me the people who are building.
Gareth, you can't do that any longer in terms of competency management. You can't do that backfilling. That.
I appreciate that, Debbie. I'm not saying that it's an acceptable. I'm just saying that's how we've ended up in the problematic state that we are, because that's what's been happening.
Yeah. I think it's brilliant what you've done, and I'll take a look at it. I think the Industry Competence Committee last week set out its new setting expectation document on competency management, so we can look and align with that. I think it's not a bad document. I think there's some improvements that can be made, yes, but I think if we also set it in that context of the stuff that's coming out from ICC, that would be helpful as well as good practice. Yes,
absolutely.
Is there anybody else? So, for example, David, Richard, Cyprian, who are carrying out similar types of things, Matt as well, probably. Would you be interested? I mean, just put in the chat if you'd like to, if you'd like us to organise something to look at that. Would you be willing to contribute what you've got, Richard, or get involved in reviewing it?
Possibly, depending on availability. Yes.
Of course. No, that's a given, really. I mean, we're all volunteers, and we recognise that. It's just that I think there's a consensus that we, by standardising some of this stuff, it's going to make it a lot easier for people to comply, rather than, Mott's having a way of doing it, and other consultancies doing the same. Well, let's just ask. Do you think this is worth us looking at? I mean, what I was going to do was just go back to what was discussed at the last design, the last meeting. Because we've got, this is the advisory group workshop. I'm sorry, Debbie, have you wanted to also update on the competency?
No, I've just put the link in there. I mean, there's just been a new document published, so I put that in the link for people to look at. Yes, I'm happy to share what my feedback is on it with the group if that's helpful as well.
Okay, so let me just show you this. Matt, carry on, please.
All I was going to say, George, is we're involved slightly later in the process than Gareth. So I mean, ideally, the document that Gareth had on the screen, and that level of knowledge and involvement prior to our involvement in the process would be most welcome, to be perfectly honest. We have a document which is a standard sort of letter of agreement that's sent out, which is on the back of the CDM regulations, just states that we request confirmation that the client is aware of their duties under CDM, and we try and put that onto our client to try and ensure that that chain of acknowledgement of the CDM duties is carried through right from the client to whoever is receiving the information. The amount of pushback that we get to that letter is above anything else that we put forward, apart from perhaps payment. We get resistance to acknowledging, signing, and returning that letter generally.
Which, so is there any sort of legal requirement? I suppose there isn't a legal requirement to do it. That's part of the problem, isn't it? But that's not going to change. I can't see that changing.
It's more just an acknowledgement that under, I think it's Appendix 1, the client has to acknowledge that they're aware of their CDM duties prior to commencing works on the project. Now, because we acknowledge that a lot of parties are unlikely to be aware of their duties under CDM, that's why we, at a point that we're involved, when hopefully that's all been agreed prior, we say, can we just have confirmation on our involvement that other parties are aware? And like I say, that should have already happened. We don't receive any acknowledgement of that, or very rarely do we.
That's concerning. I was at I helped facilitate a workshop that Dame Judith presented at about 3 weeks ago at UCL, and one of the things that there was a whole range of people on that. There was the people from the regulator. There was CROSS. I don't know if everybody's aware of CROSS, which is the industry reporting consultancy, and what was very consistent there was discussions around competency and the lack of sort of measures or means of actually getting people to do anything other than signing. I mean, that I think that's quite telling, really, isn't it? And if we can then have a mechanism to, I mean, this comes to what Debbie's been bashing me over the head with for the last 4 years.
Well, they still don't listen, George.
Yeah. So
I think there's another issue here, George, is AI has a big place in helping a lot of this, yes. And that's, if we're going to make the effort easier, then we need to use some of the tools as well, yeah. This shouldn't be done just by humans.
I absolutely agree. Gareth?
Sorry, George. I'll also send Jiz a white paper that underpins what you've just said, Debbie, which is how to unlock the gateway process using a large language model with an overlay, not specifically for fire safety, but focusing on fire safety, because that's where all the gateway rejections are focused on that fire safety element. So I'll also share a white paper that I wrote. It's on my LinkedIn, but I'll send it over and share it. By all means, anybody criticize it. I'm just one person trying to walk 1,000 miles. So if it opens up your synapses and you can improve on it, that's my aim.
Yeah, I was also in discussion yesterday at a Bridge AI event, which was a construction event about lots of new AI companies in construction. And there was another one that was doing some interesting stuff on the building safety regulations. Yes. So there are others trying to crack this nut. We should be aware of and monitor, because at some point something will come out that is a good enough quality to help us. In terms of competency, once they've done that, we can put a lot of AI semantics on it, which is a type of AI which is trained for the competency domain, so we can add value to it.
I think what's also useful to look at is the information that we've been compiling on safety critical assets. So we ran 4 workshops last week, and out of that we've got some really high quality validated information about what's required. So if I just give you one example of that, at that event, that Dame Judith event, she actually raised a particular example of a sprinkler system that was designed to do, I think it's student accommodation, and the pump that was actually used was only able to pump to the 13th floor, and there's 20 floors, right? And the installer of the pump was aware of the fact that it wasn't adequate, but they went ahead and did it anyway because that was the specification they were working to. And it begs the question as to what is the mechanism for a specialist subcontractor, for example, who's been given a spec to actually report that? Because who are they going to report it to? And what we're then doing, so since then, we've been looking with Cross about having an anonymous reporting service whereby somebody being placed in that situation who obviously wouldn't want to, I mean, by their professional responsibilities, they should have raised it. But everybody's at risk there, aren't they? Anybody that's above the 13th floor would be at risk. So how do they actually report it? So we're coming up with something in BIM4Housing. Those of you that have been around for long enough might know that we've got something called the black box section. And what we're doing, we've been doing some work on it to make that better, so that by the end of this week, people that come across things that they have identified, if they want to report it anonymously to somewhere, we're going to provide the vehicle for that. So just the final bit on that. So when we were talking with the sprinkler group on Thursday morning, one of the experts in sprinklers said, well, it's worse than that. He said, in London, Thames Water have turned down the pressure in the pipes because they want to reduce leaks. And what he was saying is that affects the sprinkler systems. So that was a bit of knowledge that, I don't think everybody in the meeting was aware of. And it's something that, who would somebody like that's an expert in it, who would they actually report it to? Because they can't report it to the regulator. The regulators now, there's only 2 bodies or 2 people that the regulator has set up to take information from. One's residents and the other is the principal accountable person. Now, if the principal accountable person doesn't have the budget or is compromised in some way, then people aren't going to find out. So anyway, that's something. So if anybody's interested in that black box thing, maybe just put black box into the chat. Right. So Gareth.
Sorry, George. I'm just looking at the reporting. Surely in that incident, it's up to the AP and the PAP to report the sprinkler issue. But if they're not listening to the designer, you can use the HSE portal to raise concerns in regards to safety. So is it not worth exploring that HSE portal? And that's where people, because that in itself reports any issues in relation to health and safety concerns in the built environment during construction, etc., etc. Just what I'm trying to do is not get you go off and there's already something there that could be used in that instance.
How successfully is it being used? How many things
Well,
are being reported to it?
So from my experience, when I've logged an issue in regards to health and safety on a construction site, whatever, where people are not listening to advice, you get an email back within 8 hours, and then a case officer is assigned, and they will then fill in the gaps. So it might be worth speaking to the HSE and firstly say, if we raise a building safety concern via the reporting tool on the HSE website, is it just going to sit in a void, or will it be looked into by a health and safety executive officer who's looking at the safety concern rather than the BSR? Because I don't know if everyone's aware, but the BSR are the repurposed environmental health officers from the local authority. That's who the BSR people are, and that's why there's issues in regards to their ability to look at design and stuff like that, because they're not used to that. They're used to giving things like ratings on food outlets and things like that. So they're on a bit of a journey to upskill. So yeah, it's just food for thought, George, rather than create something that may already able to be in use.
We don't want to do anything that is. I mean, what I'm saying is that every week, every day, I see things being put up on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Of the fact that this fire door's not been installed properly, or this these penetration seals haven't been done properly, and all that sort of stuff. And I think that information isn't being coordinated. So what we're doing, we've had this BIM, this black box thing in place for years. And in the early days, we were getting a lot of stuff on it but we need to structure it a little bit better. So that's what we've done. Matt.
Just in relation to your example there, George, of the contractor being aware that the pump wouldn't cover more than the 13th floor, but it was done anyway. I would say that's not a rare occurrence. That's not specifically that, obviously, but there are very numerous similar items that we see on most projects. One of the problems is that at stage 5, the contractor has allowed for whatever's in the specification. They've allowed for whatever design they perceived. I mean, design is an incredibly difficult thing to try and price, because you're trying to work out what might become in a certain situation. But they've allowed for a certain amount. If then something becomes apparent that is a change due to something being wrong, they are working on effectively outside of their contractual agreement. They have contractual fees on that item. So to report that and to go through that potentially very long-winded process of back and forth of why it's wrong, prove that it doesn't work. I mean, a number of times I hear sort of main contractors or sort of the client team stating, prove that doesn't work. We've got a situation at the moment with a ceiling that I was speaking to our some of our team about yesterday, where it's a ceiling that's open at both ends, and we're being told to prove that it doesn't provide fire performance. It's daft stuff like that you haven't, as a contractor, you haven't got the time to be doing that. You need to be getting on with the rest of the project. And you mentioned about the anonymous reporting process. I mean, I think it's a step in the right direction, certainly, because in a lot of cases, the contractor sometimes won't have the means to report. So they'll have an RFI process potentially, but a lot of RFIs remain unanswered for quite a period of time. As well as that, we've run a couple of projects recently where the RFI process has effectively been sort of circumvented. We've had an intermediate contractor who has stated they're going to be answering RFIs, and so certainly anybody further down the chain than them have been required to communicate via email, which isn't recorded. It isn't how the process is supposed to work. And it doesn't surprise me that is the result. And I think ideally what I would want to see from this situation is a mandatory process whereby the responsible parties, the client design team, have a requirement to put a process in place that acknowledges any concerns that are raised and resolves them, or intends to resolve them within a certain timescale. Because I think that's the only way to do it realistically, without relying on the person who's priced and is trying to deliver the job to highlight bits and pieces and raise those.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's really helpful. Nick, you had your hand up.
No, sorry. I was just going to say you can't rely on. No one should be relying on the HSE or the cross-reporting mechanism for something that's impacting human safety, within
Immediately.
days. Yeah.
I agree.
And that's already been said. I just, these other routes are important, but there has to be some empowering mechanism. The airlines went through this in the 70s, where flight crew had to be empowered to challenge the judgment of the captain, because there had been occurrences where the captain had used his dominance and his authority to crash the plane, or take the wrong solution. So yeah, they went through a whole cultural retraining thing to say, actually, the captain is the captain, but it's the team that's responsible for the safety. And if it's necessary to put it into contracts that any issues must be notified, then that must be done.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting example of that that we've been considering at the moment is that if, for example, you look at data, where this is something obviously that I'm involved with, if you've got information that is in, let's say, a common data environment, and if somebody wants to, the digital record is something now that is a requirement, and it therefore is an important source of information going back from when the project started, and maybe going back for 10 years, 15 years. There's a temptation for somebody to just have all of that deleted. And if they want to remove the evidence, so what's the duty of care on maybe somebody like A-Site or whatever to be that permanent record? Because a contractor or somebody that is paying for that at some stage, do you understand what I'm saying? It's an interesting one, because the digital record now is I think we're in a very different world in terms of that type of information. Does anybody have a view on that?
I think Garrett's got a
Carry on.
I just wanted to add a bit to that and to Nick's point. under the Health and Safety at Work Act, by your acts and admissions, you can be prosecuted under that if you knowingly mislead, etc., etc. So the reason I'm saying the HSE portal is, as a designer on a project, I will tell the client, look, this is what's been specified. It doesn't do the job. I'm not an enforcer. I'm not a regulator. I advise the clients, if you install that, it will only pump to the 13th floor. You need a bigger pump set. You need a brake tank, whatever the case may be. The client chooses to do none of that, then ultimately you then track that in your golden thread. So you're providing within all of your documentation, this is what was said on the matter. Me personally, I would then raise it with the HSE. You're protected under whistleblower policies. Getting that written into a contract is going to be very hard, especially now when contracts are attempted to be rewritten to remove the Housing Grants Act in regards to going to adjudication, because people want more control over who determines whether something needs to be rectified or not. It's happening now in the commercial world. There's lots of lawyers out there trying to rewrite and cancel out certain acts. So I haven't got the answer. I'm just saying these are the problems that are day to day, and getting anybody to write, like Nick suggested in a contract, that any issues must be raised and will be actioned. I think you'll find a lot of people avoid that. So whatever we come up with, and it's the royal we, it's got to be done ethically. So we're telling the right people and the reasons why. And it doesn't absolve us because you're part of the project. So you've got then a moral choice. Do you walk away from the project? And in this commercial world, not a lot of people can do that. Or do you raise it and you advise, I've raised it with the HSE, you're going to have to explain to them. I don't know, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so just picking up on that, you just said there that that contractor, that installation contractor, would then should report it to the client, or you should report it to the client. Who's the client? Yeah, if they are a specialist subcontractor that's maybe working for a tier 1 M&E contractor, who in turn is working for a construction company, who in turn is working for a developer, and the maybe some of that is social housing, that's where the client of that is a social landlord. Who is actually responsible? It's complicated, isn't it? Matt, you've got your hand up.
All I was going to say, George, again, as Gareth says, I'm not providing any answers here. I think it's a question that needs further discussion and considerable review to try and fully understand how we might go about addressing it. But just in relation to your previous comment, George, about A-Site, the RFI process via A-Site or any of the other project portals, I don't think that is a sufficient means. It's potentially an early identification means of raising something, but the number of RFIs are raised about everything, some of them simple, easy to resolve, some of them potentially serious concerns, isn't really an ideal platform to identify what could be a serious cause of defect, especially if it's something that is very clear. Now, as Nick has mentioned, ideally you would want something in a contractually binding obligation, a legal requirement, something along those lines. But as Gareth has stated, it's perhaps unfeasible to expect that to be in a contract. What I would say, however, is we see changes to contracts where it suits those providing them. So when, for example, following the tall building working group, we started to see numerous contracts coming through that we were being asked to sign, almost guaranteeing that people would not experience creaking of the petitions in tall buildings, something that couldn't ever be provided. And it was one of the outcomes of that tall buildings working group that wouldn't be something that should be expected. Yet we still saw it in contracts because it was almost a sort of passing on of that risk,
transfer risk.
Yeah. Now, if not contractual, and this is more a question to the wider group, how do we go about implementing a requirement which is in effect a sort of whistleblowing procedure of somebody within that process at whatever level saying, I've noticed something I don't think is correct or I don't think is safe? There should be a process that it has an obligation to acknowledge that and to investigate it further with the interest of resolving it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, just to emphasize that we're not saying at all that it shouldn't be. We shouldn't use all of the as Gareth's saying there, the HSE HSE example, but in the aviation industry, as Nick was referring to earlier, what they do now and have been doing for some time on near misses is if the pilot reports it within or promptly, it's 3 days in the UK and it's 10 days in America, they're absolved of responsibility. That's my understanding. So what they're doing there, they're encouraging people to report examples. And by doing that, what they're able to do isn't go after that particular person at all. It's actually to be able to identify where there are things that are happening that could be down to other circumstances. And therefore they see patterns. And that's where I was thinking something that this more anonymous way of doing it would be a useful thing to do, because then it's not something that people are threatened by. It's just something that they've found something that isn't right, and therefore we could you could see if that's happening a lot across lots of examples, like that sprinkler example. I don't mean the pump bit, but the pressure not being right because of what Thames Water have done. That's something that could get picked up at a more generic level. So, Gareth, hand back to you.
Sorry, George. It was just to go and just say to Matt. So on a project, Matt, really the principal designer, whether that be for Part B or whether it be for the general duties, that's the gatekeeper on safety for the project. Obviously, one fire safety, one for buildables and maintenance safety. That really needs to be the person who is actioning any change or any reporting. That's the role under CDM. And also the Building Safety Act. So whatever the answer is, that person almost needs to be burdened with any issues on a project where a designer is being bullied to work unethically or provide a substandard design for something. You are the gatekeeper of that information and the escalation of that, whether it be to the client's agent, whatever. And again, that person can't force the client to do something about it, but maybe they are the gatekeeper that then raises it to the external party, like the HSE or whoever. I don't know. As I say, I've not got the answers, but it's unfortunate that these things we're having to discuss now, where people are going, well, you've only asked for this pump, so it's only going to pump to the 13th floor. You're dealing with a HRB. It's got, 7 more floors above it, you know, the legislation asks for all areas to be covered by sprinklers and for it to be suitably designed. You've not done any of that, so you as a designer have failed your job under CDM, etc. So I don't know.
As Matt's saying though, that even though he's raising something there with that ceiling that you were saying is open at both ends, it's pretty obvious that that isn't suitable. But
well, in that
running
instance, with the ceiling being open at both ends, so you're looking at ADB and what the requirements are for those ends to be closed off with suitable fire stops or cavity barriers. So the fire engineer is the one accountable for that. Every 20 meters, a void should be divided by either fire stops or cavity barriers. So you're challenging then somebody else's design in regards to how are you functionally meeting the requirements of ADB? And if you can't, where's your justification to use BS 999, etc., etc.? So,
but what does he do as a contractor? He's or as a designer, what does he do? Because the fire engineer almost certainly won't be involved, because the fire engineer, in my experience, is, I mean, they're like hen's tooth, aren't they? It's actually quite difficult to find fire engineers at the moment.
Fire engineers should be involved. It should be involved in all the REBA stages: REBA 2, REBA 3, REBA 4, REBA 5, and handover. Certainly, any design being handed over and all of your design being part of the Reg 38 pack, etc., etc. So the fire engineer should always be involved across the scheme.
Yeah, but the point, what I'm saying is, on the ground, yeah, that's not happening, I believe. The feedback I'm getting is that the fire engineer is brought in at the beginning of the project for a particular purpose. The scope that they're given is to, I think, normally to advise the architect, and then they don't get a retained commission through the life of the job. Am I wrong?
Well, it all depends who is appointing the fire engineer, but through the different REBA stages, and REBA 5 being handover, the fire engineer should be involved. What ultimately in this scenario, I would be writing to the fire engineer via whatever portal that the projects run, and I would be saying, please be aware there are no cavity barriers within this void. And I believe there to be a breach in design, circling the architect, whatever sort of thing. It doesn't absolve Matt because he's raised it, but ultimately the principal contractor on the scheme is the one who should be addressing these items, because that is going to be a latent defect further down the line, and it will come back and bite the principal contractor ultimately where it hurts with a Defective Premises Act claim. So I think what doesn't happen enough on schemes are design team meetings where everybody comes together and talks about issues observed in the built and with design. People are just rushing through, get it built, whatever sort of thing, whereas these should be captured in real time.
Agreed, Matt.
What I would say, George, one thing I think we're overlooking here is that this is far more of an issue on projects where that we are involved in, where we are acting on behalf of the trade contractor. Now, the reason for that is that the trade contractor, the guys who are often identifying and acknowledging these issues, won't necessarily have contact with all of these other parties. They won't have a line of communication with the fire engineer. They won't have a direct line of communication necessarily with the architect. Their line of communication is with the main contractor. Now, on all of the projects that we're involved in, and to sort of second your comments in, to sort of paraphrase effectively, where is the fire engineer? The fire engineers' involvement in a lot of projects that we're working on, they are looking at individual case assessments. So a PFPF assessment of a certain scenario, and in some cases they are, and this is purely sort of what I've heard sort of through the grapevine, but they're charging anything up to sort of about 10,000 per assessment. So the main contractor is understandably reluctant to get them involved and provide an assessment. In addition to that, the assessment can only be provided once there is a large amount of primary data, and in many cases there may not be. So we're seeing very few projects where the fire consultant will be involved on a ad hoc consultancy basis,
or even a retained basis.
Exactly that, yeah. So this is where that they'll do something if there's a very clear scope and they've received prior instruction to provide a set of information, i.e. please provide a report on this scenario. But we're not seeing that ongoing involvement at all, and that's more or less every project. There are very few, even the ones where we've got an active fire consultant involvement. And I can think of one at the moment that we've had ongoing for about 18 months where they have, and the fire consultant is actually very good, but they are still being appointed when required to provide an assessment.
Yeah. David?
It seems we're lucky enough to work with some very good fire consultants and also quite switched on contractors. So we've just had 2 projects that both completed last month where the fire engineers were retained all the way through. Both design and build projects. And we had similar issues to that ceiling issue on both projects. So on one, it was a residential project. It wasn't tall enough to trigger the HRB requirements, but it was picked up very late in the process that there were various electrical cables running through the fire protected lobby to the fire escape stair and the lift lobby, in contradiction to the wiring regulations. And we worked through with the fire engineer and the M&E subcontractor to, at that stage, we couldn't move the cables. Everything was cabled in. So we had to work to look to, could we put in a fire rated ceiling? Could we change the fire strategy so that particular rule didn't apply? And we ended up doing a combination of the two, working very closely with the consultant there, Hydroc. I think they're now Stantec, but that was very, very good. On another project was a school project, 3-story school project with cross corridor doors, creating that fire break and ductwork passing over the top of them. Due to the amount of services that were going through, they couldn't form fire-stopped fire breaks around all the ductwork and all the pipe work that was going through what is quite a narrow and congested corridor. So again, we worked with the fire engineer to change the compartmentation strategy on each floor so that we didn't have to do that, because a lot of the partitions that were already under construction, although they weren't designated as 30-minute or 60-minute, they were meeting that requirement anyway because they had to meet very, very onerous acoustic requirements. So their construction meant that by their very nature that they were meeting the fire requirement. So we just had to make sure that everything was fire stopped for that rating going through it. Both of those things were then picked up by the contractor in their principal contractor role with Regulation 38 trackers that were then disseminated to the whole design team, where we all had to sign that, yes, for our part in it, we were satisfied that the works that had happened on site as changes to that fire strategy had occurred, and we were happy with it in our role. So I think we've been quite lucky in that respect for both of those.
Sure. Thank you, David. Cyprian.
Yeah, I think every project is different. On most of my projects, I've had issues with, not issues, but discussion with the fire engineer in deciding what they are responsible for, who's responsible for what. And I just had something here in a meeting, a recent meeting with a fire engineer, and this is what he said to me, that the fire engineer's role is to set the minimum performance criteria for the building in order to meet the functional requirement. I think somebody talked about cognitive barrier and what have you. Another issue where I raised this in a design meeting, and his remarks was, we do not spec detail design of system, and that's for others. The functional requirement of what they do is just show how to meet the functional requirement. They do not design system, they just spec. And they're saying that stuff like example fire barrier should be picked up. This is what they're saying, should be picked up at stage 5. We just tell it, the architect will, we put it in our report. The architect then make sure that their drawing is updated to match the report and what have you. But I want to share something based on these conversations I've been having with fire engineers. Can I just share something I've developed?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
As a PD. Can you see my screen?
Yes, can. Yeah.
So based on these ongoing issues I've been having with different consultants who's responsible for, I decided some time ago to develop this document. And it's a design competency declaration tracker. And basically, obviously, this is what if the client should ask me to review all the designers' competence or what have you, this is what I use. And every designer will have a design role. This is a document at this stage I will issue to the design team and ask them to confirm that they're satisfied with the narrative of their design role specifically. So, it depends on the project, it depends on the scope of work that contract has been agreed with the fire engineer. But what I'm finding out with a lot of fire engineer, they don't go beyond as I said, just giving that minimum performance criteria and issuing that report. The only time they will go back to that report and update it is if someone like myself has reviewed something against a drawing, something does not comply, then they will go back or say something is missing. Or if a say another designer or contract is a clashing designer or what have you, that's the only time they will actually go back to that report and update it. Tend not to go beyond stage 4. I rarely see a fire fire engineer that goes beyond stage 4. As somebody quite, I think you said rightly said that, a retainer fee needs to be considered, or even stage 5 works need to be considered, and not just wait until the end of stage 5 and stage 6, where they now need to just update the as-built report and over.
Okay, I think that's really helpful. I'm going to just ask if you could just hold on for a minute, Matt. What we've just been discussing here, I think, is a good example of what we can do collaboratively. Because if we've got maybe some agreed scope of service where you've got, for example, David's just said there that his experience of what the fire engineer's scope was is very different to what Cyprian and Matt has just said there. And Gareth has got an expectation of what the fire engineer should be doing, but unless that's reflected in some sort of agreed scope, then everybody's going to assume that the fire engineer is doing something that they've not been scoped to do. So what I'm suggesting is that we maybe look at that as being, let's get together for an hour and share some examples. So if you fancy that, if you'd like to do that, then just put scope into the chat. Is that something that would interest people?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, Matt. We've got a couple of minutes left.
That's fine. I'll be quick. I'm not disagreeing with anything that either David or certainly Cyprian have said there. I suspect this may be a combination of two concerns. Firstly, I believe that the fire consultant's appointment may not be continuing much after stage 4. So wouldn't surprise me to see the fire engineers' involvement being maintained up until the end of stage 4, where it goes over to contractor design, and then they're no longer appointed, or it's considered their services are no longer required because it's then the contractor's responsibility. In addition to that, I think, and just reflecting on a couple of points that Cyprian made, I think that there is an interpretation that the fire engineer or a specialist trade package consultant will provide information, and therefore one or the other is required, when in fact that's not the case. There should be a trade specific specialist involved who is going to work on detailing, making the arrangements feasible. But as well as that, if they are identifying issues, they need to be fed back through the fire engineer. For example, and I'll use a particular case example. We had a interface on a medical research project where there was a security wall, and the line of the security mesh meant that it was running in the opposing direction to the fire compartment corner. Therefore, you could either have a fire compartment corner or a security corner. And it was simply a matter of one or the other. We raised this, but that's not something that we said it ultimately is going to require a revision of the fire strategy to resolve this. But it was quite difficult to get any involvement from the fire consultant on the project to actually start to investigate that. And it went on for at least a couple of months of to and fro of people trying to avoid the scenario. What about if we do this, rather than actually focus on what needed to happen and put a plan in place to resolve it?
Yes. Yeah. How was it resolved?
Ultimately, the fire engineer got involved, and there was an amendment to the fire strategy. But and in that case, there was actually resolution by. That's what it needed, to be perfectly honest. It's not something. I think we're all too keen to try and say, well, it's a contractor's problem now. It's become their issue. But in a lot of cases, if they're identifying the problem, we should be grateful for that. Not saying, okay, well, it's your issue because you've identified it, because often they don't have the means to do so. Even if they've got a consultant involved, we can further explain the issue. We can say what we think needs to be done, but we may not have the multi-trade package involvement to resolve that. And in some cases, if it's an amendment to the fire strategy, that should be going back through the fire engineer. That shouldn't be. We can't have contractors implementing fire strategy changes. There'll be mayhem resulting from that.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, I hope everybody's found this meeting useful. I mean, we've all committed an hour and a half, which is obviously a big chunk out of the day. But I really do feel that these sessions are helpful. Does everybody agree with that, or any contrary views? Are you going to come next time?
It's been very helpful.
Yeah, I find it useful. It's relevant, and you know, it does give, you know, you do get a lot of views and see what's going on in the industry. And as you said, it's just finding a way forward, coming up with, you know, as an industry, coming up with building safe regulator, they say, and then Judith actually said it forces an industry to come up with systems that will work for us, and that's what we should be doing, to be honest with you.
So Cyprian, the scope thing, we've got a few people that said that they'd be interested in getting together on that. Is that something that you'd be willing to share?
Sure.
Some of the things that you've been doing there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant.
I would.
Good. Okay. Well, we'll try and set something up on that. And the other question that we opened up with was the question on the PDBR toolkit, as it were. I think, David, you were saying that Associated Architects, you've done your own version of that. Is that something that we could get one of your people that have been involved in that engaged in looking at that?
Yes, I'm sure it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So if anybody else is interested in the Reba toolkit side of things, I don't know anybody else that's doing. I think Gareth, you do PDBR, don't you? And obviously Cyprian does. So we'll maybe pull something together on that. Good. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody. See you next time.
Thank you all. Thanks very much.
Take care.
Cheers.
Thanks all.